The mistake was already made. Doors behind him, eyes in front, no clean exit. Bumpy felt it before he saw it, the shift in air when power notices something it doesn't like. He stood still, half hidden between soft fabrics and silent money, knowing one wrong move would light the fuse. This was Harlem. This was enemy ground dressed up as manners. He wasn't there to buy. He wasn't there to be seen. He was there because something precious had slipped its leash. Across the floor, 20 steps away, a woman moved like she belonged to the building. Calm, polished, the kind of confidence money teaches you early. One hand held a child's fingers, small shoes, unsteady steps, curious eyes that hadn't learned fear yet. That was the danger. Bumpy kept his hat low, spine straight, breath slow. Every instinct screamed to close the distance, but instinct was a luxury he couldn't afford today. He stayed where he was, watching reflections instead of faces, counting exits that didn't belong to him. The boy laughed, just once, not loud, not rude, but wrong for this room. The sound cracked the silence like a dropped glass. Heads turned, a clerk froze. Somewhere nearby, a man paid to notice things adjusted his stance. Bumpy felt his pulse climb but kept his hands quiet. Violence was easy. Restraint took skill. The woman with the child leaned down, whispered something soft, tried to pull him back from touching what glittered. The boy didn't understand the rules yet. He only understood shine. That's when the real threat entered. She didn't rush. She didn't need to. People moved out of her way without being asked. Fur at her shoulders, steel behind her smile. The kind of person who never questioned whether the world would make room it always had. Her eyes landed on the child, not curiosity, assessment. The boy slipped free, took 2 wobbly steps, reached for the softness at her coat like it was a toy meant for him. Fingers brushed luxury. Time slowed. The woman recoiled as if burned. Her face tightened, sharp and offended, like something sacred had been dirtied. Her hand came up fast, too fast. Bumpy took 1 step forward before his mind caught up with his body. This was the moment, the trap. Expose yourself and lose everything. Stay invisible and swallow poison. The child stumbled back, startled, confusion blooming into fear. The mother rushed in, voice shaking but strong, standing between her son and something that thought itself untouchable. The room held its breath. Bumpy felt the old heat rise, not business, not territory, blood. His jaw tightened until it ached. He could already see how this would end, either in bodies or in secrets dying loud. And the woman smiled, not kind, cert. She leaned in, close enough for her words to cut, for everyone to hear but no one to stop. The kind of smile that says the law is on my side and you know it. Bumpy knew then, whatever she said next was going to change everything. And he was going to have to decide right here whether silence was still a weapon or just another form of surrender. Her words landed heavy, not loud, carefully chosen. Built to wound without leaving a mark. The room didn't react because rooms like this never do. They let cruelty pass if it's dressed well enough. A few faces turned away. A few pretended to study price tags. Everyone understood the rules here. Don't interrupt power when it's correcting something. The boy didn't understand any of it. He just felt the change. The way the air went cold. The way his mother's arms tightened around him like she was bracing for impact. Then it happened. Not a slap. Not a shove, something worse. A gesture so small most people missed it. A deliberate insult disguised as nothing, disgust made physical. That's when Bumpy's vision narrowed. The world tunneled down to one face, one decision. One breath held too long. He felt the weight under his jacket. Familiar. Reassuring. Ending things would be simple. One step, one motion. The kind of violence that rewrites rooms and headlines alike. But he saw what came after, hands grabbing him, names shouted, questions that didn't have safe answers, and the boy, his boy, suddenly becoming visible to every enemy he'd ever made. That was the real weapon pointed at his chest, so Bumpy stopped. It took everything he had. The woman with the child said something sharp back, brave but reckless, courage without leverage. Bumpy admired it, feared it, loved it in a way that hurt. The other woman laughed. Soft, cruel, certain she'd won. And just like that, authority moved to protect itself. A man in a uniform appeared. Apologies were offered, but not to the right people. The problem was escorted away. The disturbance removed. Bumpy watched them leave. Watched the child's face turn back once, confused, searching. Watched the door close. Something in him cracked, quiet but permanent. He didn't move until the room returned to pretending nothing had happened. Then he stepped back into shadow, hands clenched so tight his nails cut skin. Pain helped. Pain kept him where he needed to be. He waited. Patience was his real reputation. When the woman in fur finally finished spending money that insulated her from consequences, Bumpy was already gone. Outside, breathing cold air, calculating. He didn't follow close. Never close. He let her feel alone first. A car slid in behind her like coincidence. Another man drove. One Bumpy trusted to keep his mouth shut and his eyes open. They didn't speak as the city changed around them. Stone grew heavier, streets quieter, guards more visible, the kind of neighborhood that thought itself untouchable. The car stopped. Bumpy stayed seated, lighting a cigarette slow, steady, not shaking, not anymore. Not tonight, he said quietly, staring at the house ahead. Tonight S for learning. The other man nodded. He'd heard that tone before. It never meant mercy. Bumpy exhaled smoke, eyes fixed on the dark windows, because people like her always believed they were clean, and Bumpy Johnson knew exactly how to introduce dirt. But even as the plan began to form, slow, surgical, unforgiving, another thought crept in. If this woman could reach the boy once, others could too, and next time it wouldn't be an accident in a public place. Next time would be deliberate. Bumpy didn't sleep that night. Sleep was for men who believed the danger had passed. He knew better. Trouble didn't disappear, it just changed clothes and waited. By morning, the city was already whispering. Not loud, not public. The kind of talk that travels through kitchens, back stairwells, service entrances. The kind Bumpy paid attention to. He sat where he always did, coffee untouched, eyes steady. The room around him buzzed with music and laughter, but none of it reached his table. His mind was already elsewhere, pulling threads, weighing pressure points, mapping lives that thought they were sealed tight. He sent for a woman who saw everything and was never seen. She slid into the seat across from him without asking, rain still clinging to her coat. She didn't smile, she didn't need to, he didn't waste words. "I want the truth," Bumpy said. "Not the polished kind, the kind people hide." Her eyebrow lifted just enough to acknowledge the target. She already knew who he meant. Everyone with sense did. "Careful," she said quietly. "That name opens doors that don't close again." Bumpy leaned back. "Good." She talked slowly, precisely. Patterns, habits, private gatherings wrapped in respectability, meetings disguised as prayer, faces that preached order in daylight and rehearsed hate at night. Each detail sharpened the picture. By the time she finished, Bumpy wasn't angry anymore. Anger was messy, this was something colder. "Friday," she said at last. "No entourage, no witnesses she trusts." Bumpy nodded once, that was all. Night fell heavy when Friday came. Rain pressed down on the streets like it was trying to erase something. Bumpy watched from a distance, letting the dark work for him. He wasn't there to strike, not yet. He was there to collect truth. Minutes stretched. Then a flicker, light where it shouldn't be. Movement too disciplined to be coincidence. He waited. A sudden flash cut through the basement window, once. Then again, voices rose, confused, angry, footsteps ran. A man burst from the alley, breathing hard, clutching proof like it weighed more than gold. He dove into the car, eyes wide, adrenaline loud. "You're not gonna like this," he said. Bumpy took the items without a word. Fabric, metal, symbols that pretended to be holy while dreaming of blood. He examined them calmly, like a surgeon confirming a diagnosis. Then he smiled. Not wide, not pleased, resolved. "Drive," he said. They didn't head north. They headed straight back into money and marble. Bumpy worked fast, deliberate. Packaging mattered, presentation mattered. Fear worked best when it arrived politely. When it was done, he sat back, hands folded, and waited again. Dawn came slow, then it happened. A scream tore through the quiet street, not surprise, not shock, recognition. Bumpy listened, eyes closed, letting it echo, letting it sink deep. But satisfaction never lasts long in his world, because even as one enemy realized she'd been seen, another had already started asking questions. And somewhere far from the city, a child who should have been invisible was about to become interesting. That was the sound Bumpy didn't hear yet, but he felt it coming. The retaliation didn't announce itself. It never does when it's smart. By midday, everything looked normal. Cars passed. Birds ignored the tension, but Bumpy had lived too long to trust quiet. Quiet meant someone was thinking. The call came soft, panicked, familiar. A woman trying not to cry. "There's a car," she said. "It's been there too long." Bumpy didn't ask questions. He didn't raise his voice. Panic travels faster than truth, and he couldn't afford either spreading. "Listen to me," he said, calm like stone. "You do exactly what I say. Doors locked, blinds closed, basement, now." A pause, breathing. Then they saw him. That was the line that froze his blood. Bumpy stood up slow, smoothing his jacket. The room around him kept laughing, kept eating, unaware a war had just shifted zip codes. "They don't know," he said. "They're guessing. Guessing gets people killed. Stay hidden." He hung up before she could argue. Orders moved fast after that. No shouting, no explanations, the right bag, the right road. The kind of preparation you make when you're not planning to miss. The drive was violent, speed cutting corners, time bending. Bumpy watched the trees blur, weapon heavy across his knees, raincoat hiding intent. He wasn't going to the house. He was going to the hunters. They found them exactly where men like that always parked, close enough to watch, far enough to feel safe. 2 suits. Cheap binoculars, confidence borrowed from someone richer. Bumpy rolled up beside them like it was nothing. The horn sounded. Annoyance turned to terror fast. The man in the other car recognized him before the words landed. Most men did. "Hand it over," Bumpy said, voice level, barrels pointed steady. "Everything you've got." Cameras, notes, names, fear-shaking hands. Bumpy listened as they talked. Who hired them? Why? What they thought they were about to uncover. When they finished, Bumpy smiled. Just enough. "Go tell your employer you were wrong," he said. "Tell him that road leads to something that bites back." The sound of metal sliding into place ended the conversation. They left fast, gravel flying. Lessons learned. Bumpy destroyed what mattered. Light burned the film. Wind scattered proof. The boy returned to being a rumor. Then he went to the house. He didn't go inside angry. He went inside tired. The child looked up and smiled, said his name wrong, said it like it belonged to him. That almost broke him. Bumpy knelt, steadying himself with the weight of something small and alive. He knew then what he'd been avoiding. This couldn't last. Every enemy he humiliated would eventually look for the reason. And once they found it, they wouldn't hesitate. He stood. Met her eyes. "You have to leave," he said, no softness, no delay, "tonight." The word hung heavy between them. Across an ocean he promised safety he couldn't join. Freedom bought with distance. Love paid in absence. Outside, engines waited. Bumpy watched taillights disappear into dark trees, each red glow cutting something loose inside his chest. He didn't follow. He turned back toward the city instead, because he knew the truth most men refuse to face. Saving someone in his world doesn't mean keeping them close. It means letting them go. And somewhere in Harlem, consequences were already lining up, patient, hungry, and aware that Bumpy Johnson had just shown the world exactly where it could hurt him. He drove back alone. No radio, no company, just engine noise and thoughts that didn't need words. By the time the city lights came back into view, the part of him that wanted peace was already gone. Harlem didn't ask how much you'd lost. It only asked what you were willing to do next. He parked where he always did, same block. Same shadows, familiar corners that knew his name even when nobody said it. Men nodded, respect without noise, fear without drama. Inside, business waited, numbers, debts, territory, the usual heartbeat of power, but something had shifted. Bumpy felt it the way you feel weather change before the clouds show up. He decrossed a line, not by striking, by revealing restraint. That kind of thing gets noticed. By nightfall, word reached him through channels that didn't exist on paper. People were asking questions they had no business asking. Not loud yet, careful, curious. The worst kind. Who did he protect? What did he fear losing? What would make him hesitate? Bumpy listened, said nothing. Silence had always been his sharpest blade. He went home to a bed that felt bigger than it used to. A woman slept beside him, unaware the ground under her life had shifted. He stared at the ceiling, already planning 3 moves ahead, already accepting what this meant. There would be tests. Someone would push. Someone always did. And when they did, they wouldn't come at his money or his muscle. They'd come at the idea that he was untouchable. Bumpy turned on his side, eyes open in the dark. He hadn't saved his son by ruining a woman. He'd painted a target no one could see yet. Because secrets don't stay buried in his world. They get dug up. Or they dig their way out. And when that happened, the next move wouldn't be about revenge. It would be about survival. The kind that costs you whatever you love most. Somewhere in the city, a phone rang. Somewhere else, a decision was made. And Bumpy Johnson felt it. The game wasn't over, it was just beginning. Part 6. The first test came quiet. No gunshots, no warnings, just absence. A runner didn't show. A payoff arrived light. A corner that usually hummed went still for half an hour too long. Small things on purpose. Bumpy noticed everyone. He sat back, let it happen. Power reveals itself when you don't rush to defend it. Whoever was probing wanted to see panic, wanted movement, wanted proof the rumors had weight. They didn't get it. Instead, Bumpy shifted pieces nobody could see. A whisper here. A delay there. He let 2 rivals collide over nothing, then stepped in like a peacemaker, made money while they blamed each other, reset the board without ever touching it. But the pressure kept coming. By the 3rd day, he knew where it was leading. Someone had spoken the unspoken question out loud. Not in Harlem, too smart for that, downtown, behind desks. Inside rooms where men wore clean shirts and dirty intentions. A cop he'd paid for years suddenly needed distance. A politician returned a favor with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The city hadn't turned on him yet, but it was leaning. Bumpy adjusted his tie in a mirror and studied his reflection. Same face, same calm. But there was something new behind his eyes. Exposure changes a man. That night Speck sat across from him, uneasy. People asking about you different, he said. Not business, personal. Bumpy nodded. He already knew. They don't know what they're asking, Bumpy said. That's what makes it dangerous. What? He stood, walked to the window, looked out at the neighborhood that had made him and would bury him one day. He loved it. That was the curse. If they find the truth, Speck said carefully, what then? Bumpy didn't answer right away. He thought of a small voice mispronouncing his name, of a laugh that didn't belong in his world, of distance measured in oceans. Then I stopped playing defense, he said finally. Outside, a car idled too long, engine running, no lights. Bumpy watched it without moving. Somebody was getting bold, and bold men make mistakes. The question wasn't who was coming. It was whether they were smart enough to walk away. Before Bumpy decided they couldn't, the car stayed. That's how Bumpy knew it wasn't coincidence. Coincidence drifts, curiosity circles. This thing waited. He didn't rush to the window, didn't signal anyone, let the night think it was winning. Men like that always get sloppy when they believe they're unseen. 10 minutes passed. Then the passenger door opened. Not a hitter, not muscle, a watcher. Bumpy exhaled slow. That told him everything. Someone upstream wanted confirmation before blood. They were still deciding whether he was a liability or a problem worth erasing. He turned from the window and reached for the phone. No anger. No speeches, just orders. By the time the watcher realized he'd been noticed, the street had changed. Footsteps where there weren't any before, shadows leaning closer. The engine in that car suddenly felt too loud. The man panicked. Bad move. He peeled off fast, tires screaming, drawing eyes he didn't want. Bumpy watched him disappear and shook his head once. Amateurs. The next morning the message arrived without words. One of Bumpy's outer spots, nothing critical, got hit. Not robbed, burned, empty, no bodies, just smoke and intention, a warning. Bumpy stood across the street, hands in his coat, watching flames chew through something he'd already replaced in his head. Loss didn't bother him. Timing did. Someone wanted him reactive. Wanted him chasing ghosts while real moves happened elsewhere. He smiled thin. By afternoon, he knew who was pulling the string. Not a rival, not the Italians, money men. The kind who hate unpredictability more than crime. The kind who'd backed a leaner quietly until she became inconvenient. Now they were cleaning up loose ends, and Bumpy Johnson felt too loose for their comfort. That night he met with men who didn't ask questions, old allies, quiet killers, thinkers with scars. He laid it out simple. "They won't come at me straight," he said. "They'll come at what proves I'm human." Nobody spoke. They didn't need to. Bumpy leaned forward, voice low. "I already sent what I love away," he continued. "So if they think they found something, let them chase it." Eyes narrowed. Understanding passed around the table. A decoy. A rumor shaped just enough to feel real, because if his enemies were hunting a secret, he'd decide where the trap was set. Bumpy stood, straightened his jacket. "By the time they realize the truth," he said, "they won't be asking questions anymore." Outside, thunder rolled far off. Not rain yet, just warning. And somewhere in the city, powerful men were about to make their final move. Thinking they'd finally cornered Bumpy Johnson. They hadn't. They just stepped onto his board. The rumor moved faster than Bumpy expected. That told him who was listening. It wasn't the streets. Streets verify before they believe. This went straight into offices with closed doors and men who didn't like surprises. Men who thought information was the same thing as control. By the second night, the watcher came back. Different car, different face, same mistake. Bumpy didn't look at him directly. He didn't have to. He felt the attention like a weight on the back of his neck. That kind of focus always gives itself away. He let the man follow him. That was the gift. Bumpy walked through Harlem slow, deliberate, stopped where people knew him, shook hands, let himself be seen doing nothing wrong. Then he crossed into a quieter stretch where lights thinned out and shadows stopped pretending. The watcher stayed too close. Bumpy turned suddenly. The man froze, reached for confidence he didn't own. "You lost?" Bumpy asked, voice calm, almost polite. The man tried to talk his way out. Words piled up. Lies on top of lies. He never reached for a weapon. That was mercy. Bumpy leaned in just enough for the lesson to land. "Tell them," he said softly, "that what they think they found isn't what they think it is." The man nodded too fast. "And tell them," Bumpy continued, eyes steady, "that next time they send someone, I won't bother correcting them." He stepped back. The watcher didn't wait to be dismissed. Bumpy watched him disappear and knew the message would travel intact. Fear is very reliable that way. But as he turned to leave, something else caught his attention. A sound that didn't belong. Footsteps behind him. More than one. Bumpy stopped. He didn't reach for anything, didn't turn around, because whatever was about to happen was no longer a question. It was a decision someone else had already made. And Bumpy Johnson had exactly one move left before the night decided for him. They didn't rush him. That was the first problem. Footsteps slowed, spaced out, practiced. Men who knew better than to crowd a cornered animal. Bumpy smiled to himself. Respect always showed up right before blood. "Evening, Mr. Johnson." The voice came from behind, calm, professional. Not street, not law, something in between. The kind of man who carries paperwork instead of a badge but ruins lives just as clean. Bumpy turned slowly, 3 of them, clean coats. No panic. One carried a leather folder like it was a weapon. Another kept his hands visible, empty, confident. The third watched the street, not Bumpy, because he already knew who he was dealing with. "You boys picked the wrong block," Bumpy said evenly. The man with the folder smiled. "We picked the right time." That was confirmation. They weren't there to kill him, not yet. They were there to measure him. To see if the rumors bent his spine. The folder opened. Photos slid halfway out. Not enough to show everything, just enough to suggest too much. A house that was Harlem. A woman who didn't belong to his world. A blur that could have been a child or could have been bait. Bumpy didn't blink. "You're fishing," he said. "Maybe," the man replied. "Or maybe we're offering you a chance to correct a misunderstanding before it becomes expensive." There it was, not blackmail, not a threat. A negotiation disguised as courtesy. Bumpy stepped closer, closing the space just enough to remind them who stood in front of them. "You already made one mistake," he said softly. "You showed me your hand before you knew the rules." The smile on the man's face tightened. "And what rule is that?" he asked. Bumpy leaned in, voice low, precise. "I don't get cornered," he said. "I decide who walks away thinking they won." For a moment, nobody spoke. The city hummed around them, unaware history was being edited in an alleyway. Finally, the man with the folder closed it. "We'll be in touch," he said, stepping back. "Sooner than you think." They walked off together. No rush, no fear. That bothered Bumpy more than guns ever did. He stood there alone, letting the night settle. He knew what came next. Pressure from above always came with deadlines, demands, ultimatums, and he knew something else too. They didn't actually know the truth yet, but now they were close enough to smell it. Bumpy adjusted his coat and started walking, already planning exits that weren't on maps, already deciding which bridges could burn without collapsing Harlem with them. Because the next move wouldn't be about intimidation. It would be about forcing him to choose power or blood. And somewhere far away, across water and borders, a life he'd sworn to protect was about to become the final piece on the board. The deadline came without a date. That's how they do it when they want you uneasy. No calls, no notes, just pressure tightening in places that mattered. A loan didn't clear. A truck got stopped for reasons nobody could explain. A familiar face crossed the street instead of shaking his hand. Harlem noticed, but nobody asked. They trusted Bumpy to handle whatever shadow had stepped into his light. He always did. But this time the shadow didn't want money, didn't want territory, it wanted leverage that breathed. Bumpy sat alone late, jacket off, sleeves rolled, studying a map that wasn't drawn on paper. Routes, names, weak points that had nothing to do with crime and everything to do with human nature. They wanted him to choose, to confirm the rumor by trying to bury it, to deny it and look scared. Either way, they'd tighten the noose. He smiled once, tired. They still didn't understand the kind of man he was. Bumpy Johnson didn't protect secrets by hiding them. He protected them by making the truth too dangerous to touch. He picked up the phone and made 3 calls. Short, controlled, no emotion wasted. By morning, the city would wake up to new noise, new scandals, new distractions aimed higher than him. Men with cleaner hands than his would start sweating. Files would surface where they shouldn't. Names would be spoken that preferred silence, if they wanted a choice. He'd changed the game, but even as the plan locked into place, one truth refused to stay quiet. Every move he made pulled eyes closer. Every victory narrowed the space between protection and exposure. Sooner or later, someone would connect the dots. And when they did, they wouldn't negotiate. Bumpy stood, slipping his jacket back on, face settling into that calm Harlem knew so well. The mask of a man who always had one more move. Outside, sirens wailed somewhere distant. Not for him. Not yet. He paused at the door, hand resting there longer than necessary. Because he knew, deep down, colder than fear. You can outthink enemies. You can outfight rivals. But you can't outrun the truth forever. And when it finally catches up, it doesn't knock. The truth made its move before sunrise, not loud, not public, precise. A name Bumpy hadn't heard in years surfaced in the wrong room. A passport number crossed a desk it shouldn't have existed on. Somewhere between Manhattan and the Atlantic, a question was asked that couldn't be taken back. Bumpy felt it in his chest before any phone rang. He was mid-coffee when Specs walked in, face tight, eyes avoiding his. That alone said enough. "We got a problem," Specs said. Bumpy didn't look up. "We always do. This one's different." That got his attention. Specs slid a folded paper across the table. Not an order, not a warrant. A notice, quiet, bureaucratic, lethal in its calm. The kind of paper that doesn't threaten, it assumes. Bumpy read it once. Then again, they weren't asking anymore. They were checking. Ports, schools, records overseas. Men who didn't care about Harlem or its rules had started pulling threads that led across water, across borders, into places Bumpy couldn't reach with muscle or money. That was the danger he couldn't shoot. He stood slowly, the room seeming smaller than it used to. "How long?" he asked. Specs swallowed. "Couple days, maybe less." Bumpy nodded. No anger, no panic, just clarity. He walked to the window, looked out at the street that had given him everything and taken just as much. This city knew him, feared him, but it couldn't protect what didn't belong to it. He reached into his pocket and felt the worn edge of a photograph he didn't look at anymore. He already knew every line of it. "Get me the phone," Bumpy said. "The one we don't use." Specs hesitated. That line has been dead years. "Not dead," Bumpy replied, "just waiting." When the phone was placed in his hand, Bumpy paused, not because he was unsure, but because once this call was made, there was no pretending anymore. No half measures, no shadows deep enough. This wasn't about reputation now, or power, or Harlem. This was about deciding how much of himself he was willing to burn. To keep the one thing he couldn't replace untouched. The line clicked. Someone answered on the other end. Quiet, alert. Bumpy opened his mouth to speak. And somewhere far away, another man was already boarding a plane, carrying questions that could end everything. The race had begun, and for the first time in a long time. Bumpy Johnson wasn't sure he was ahead. The voice on the other end didn't say hello. It didn't need to. Only one person still had that number, and only one kind of problem brought it back from the dead. "I need a door closed," Bumpy said, "across the water." Silence. "Then that door's expensive." Bumpy's eyes stayed on the street. "I know what it costs." Another pause, longer this time. "You don't usually ask," the voice said. "You usually take." Bumpy allowed himself a thin breath. "This isn't about me." "That changed things." "I can slow it," the voice finally said. "Not stop it. Papers disappear, flights miss connections, but curiosity like this, it always finds another path." "How much time?" "Enough to make a final move," the voice replied. "After that, you're on faith." The line went dead. Bumpy stood there, phone still in his hand, understanding the truth clear as glass. This wasn't about hiding anymore. It was about misdirection so big, so violent, so undeniable that the truth drowned in the noise. Specs watched him carefully. What now? Bumpy turned, eyes settled, decision already made. "Now," he said, "we give them something else to chase." Within hours, Harlem shifted. A rival crew got bold at the wrong intersection. A shipment vanished in a way that pointed fingers uptown. Old grudges resurfaced, nudged just enough to explode on their own. By nightfall, everyone important was suddenly busy with fires they hadn't planned on putting out. Downtown men stopped looking north, for the moment. Bumpy moved through it all untouched, a ghost with fingerprints everywhere. He shook hands, made peace, started wars he wouldn't have to finish. The city responded the way it always did, loud, violent, distracted. But distraction has a cost. By midnight, word came in quiet. A plane hadn't been stopped, just delayed. The man with questions was still coming. Bumpy stood alone again, coat on, hat low, feeling the weight of every move he'd ever made. He'd bent the city to protect a life that didn't belong to it, and now the city wanted payment. He looked at the clock. Hours left, not days, enough time to burn one last bridge. Or cross it himself. Outside, footsteps approached fast, urgent. Specs appeared in the doorway, breath tight. "He's landed," he said, "and he's not asking any more." Bumpy nodded once. Then he reached for his hat, because if this was going to end, it was going to end on his terms. The man didn't come alone. That told Bumpy everything he needed to know. He watched from across the street as the car pulled up, government clean, ambition dirty. Two men got out first, eyes scanning, already building lies in their heads. Then the one who mattered stepped onto the pavement. Calm, confident, certain the world answered to paper. Bumpy didn't move. Let the man feel in control a few seconds longer. Power tastes best right before it's taken away. They met inside, neutral ground, no guns visible. That was the lie they all agreed to tell themselves. The man smiled like someone who'd rehearsed this moment on the flight over. "Mr. Johnson," he said, "you've been difficult to understand." Bumpy sat unbothered. That's usually a compliment. Folders came out. Photos, timelines, guesswork dressed as certainty. "We believe," the man continued, "that you've been hiding something personal, and people like you don't hide things unless they're valuable." Bumpy listened, didn't interrupt. Silence makes men talk past their intelligence. "You help us," the man said, leaning in, "and this stays quiet. You don't, and the world gets very curious. There it was, Bumpy finally spoke. You ever notice, he said calmly, how men who rely on paper forget something important? The man frowned. Which is? That paper only matters, Bumpy said, if the people holding it live long enough to file it. The room changed, not loud, not dramatic, just the quiet realization that this conversation had never been equal. Bumpy stood, straightened his jacket. You flew a long way chasing a story, he continued. But stories are dangerous when they belong to men who write their own endings. The man opened his mouth. And somewhere outside, chaos erupted, sirens shouting. A crash too close to be coincidence. Bumpy smiled. That, he said, is your distraction. You'll leave this city busy, confused and empty-handed. The man stared, finally understanding who he'd misjudged. And if I don't? He asked. Bumpy leaned in, voice low, final. Then you won't leave at all. For a long moment, nobody breathed. Then the man nodded once, slow, careful. I'll forget this conversation, he said. Bumpy tipped his hat. Smart. As Bumpy walked out into the noise, he felt no victory, only distance, more of it, more than ever before, because he knew this wasn't over. He'd won time, not peace. And somewhere far away, beyond oceans and names, a life he could never claim was growing older without him. That was the real sentence. And it was one he'd carry alone. Until the day the past decided to come collecting. He walked back into Harlem like nothing had happened. That's how power survives, by refusing to look wounded. The block welcomed him the way it always did. Familiar nods, quiet respect. Nobody asked where he'd been. Nobody ever did. They trusted that if Bumpy was standing, the ground under them was still solid. But inside, something had shifted. He felt it in the pauses between footsteps, in the way certain conversations stopped when he passed. Not fear, calculation. People sensed pressure even when they couldn't name it. That's when he knew. The city had learned something dangerous. Not the truth, not yet, but the outline of it. Late that night, Bumpy sat alone, lights low, a glass untouched in front of him. He replayed the meeting in his head, not for what was said, but for what wasn't. The man with the folder had backed off too cleanly. Men like that always leave something behind. A contingency, a note. A name passed to someone who doesn't need permission. Bumpy reached into his pocket and finally took out the photograph. Looked at it for longer than he should have. The boy's face hadn't changed, but Bumpy had. He barely recognized the man staring back from the glass reflection. I bought you time, he said quietly to the empty room. I don't know how much. The phone rang, not the private line, not the business line. The one that meant trouble had skipped steps. Bumpy didn't answer it right away. He let it ring. Let whoever was on the other end feel the imbalance. When he picked up, the voice was unfamiliar, controlled, confident. Mr. Johnson, the voice said, we need to talk about your future. Bumpy closed his eyes. Here it was. Because when men stop threatening the present and start discussing the future, it means they've already planned what happens if you refuse. Go on, Bumpy said calmly, the voice lowered. You've been very careful, it said, but careful men still leave footprints. The line went dead. Bumpy sat there in silence, knowing one thing with absolute certainty. This wasn't about leverage anymore. This wasn't about secrets. Someone had decided the world would be simpler without Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson controlling the board, and the next move wouldn't be negotiation. It would be an attempt to end the game. He stood, slipping on his coat, already preparing for a night that wouldn't forgive mistakes. Because when the hunters stop asking questions, they start loading weapons, and somewhere in the dark, someone was already lining up a shot that wasn't meant to miss. Bumpy didn't go home. Home was predictable. Predictable got men killed. He moved through the city without pattern, changing cars, changing pace, letting the night settle before he trusted it again. The call still echoed in his head, not the words, but the certainty behind them. Someone had made a decision, and decisions like that don't get undone. They get carried out. By dawn, Bumpy had confirmed what his instincts already told him. A crew he didn't recognize had been asking the wrong questions in the right places. Quiet professionals. No colors, no flags, the kind you only see once if you're lucky. This wasn't a warning shot, this was preparation. He met his people before the sun came up. No speeches, no fear, just adjustments, safe routes burned, new ones drawn, faces memorized, names removed from rotation. Anyone you don't know, Bumpy said calmly, you treat like they already decided to kill you. They nodded, they trusted his judgment. It had kept them alive this long, but even as Harlem locked down around him, Bumpy knew the truth. You can fortify territory, you can outmaneuver enemies, but you can't protect yourself from a future someone else has already written. By late afternoon, confirmation arrived. A contract existed, not on paper, not in ink, in understanding. Bumpy Johnson had become inconvenient, too independent, too informed, too uncontrollable. The city didn't want him gone out of hatred, it wanted him gone out of efficiency. Bumpy stood alone again, looking out over streets he'd bled for, streets that would keep moving whether he was in them or not. He felt no panic, just resolve. If they want me, he said quietly, they'll have to come into my daylight. Because Bumpy Johnson didn't disappear, he made people regret looking for him. As night approached, a familiar car rolled by, slow, deliberate, just once. No shots, no signals, a promise. Bumpy adjusted his hat, stepped into the glow of the streetlight and waited. The end wasn't here yet, but it was close enough to feel breathing on his neck. And the next time, someone moved against him. There would be no more warnings. The streetlight hummed above him. Bumpy stood right under it on purpose. Men who planned executions liked darkness. They liked corners, doorways, distance. Stepping into the light was an insult. It said, I know you're there and I'm not running. A car passed slow, different from the others, too clean, too quiet. It didn't stop. That was worse. Bumpy didn't move until it was gone. Then he turned, walked the block like a man with nowhere urgent to be. Every step measured, every reflection checked. Windows were mirrors if you knew how to use them. He felt it again. That pressure, that sense of being counted, not followed, tracked. This wasn't street work. This was coordination, timetables, handoffs. Men who rotated so no single face stayed too long. Someone was tightening the circle. Bumpy ducked into a building that wasn't his, walked out the back, changed coats, slipped into another car that had been waiting since before sundown. The driver didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. They drove, not fast. Fast draws attention. Halfway across town, the driver spoke for the first time. We got a tail. Bumpy nodded. I know. 2 cars. I know. The driver waited. You want to lose them. Bumpy looked out the window, calm as ever. No, I want to see how bad they want it. The car ahead slowed. The one behind crept closer, not sloppy, confident, like men who believed the decision was already approved. Bumpy smiled faintly. That told him everything. They weren't trying to scare him anymore. They were positioning. He leaned forward slightly. Next turn, he said, take it wide. The driver hesitated. That street's dead. Exactly. The turn came up, empty stretch. Warehouses, long sightlines, nowhere to hide. The kind of place endings get written. The driver took it, the cars followed. Bumpy reached under the seat, felt cold metal, familiar weight, not fear, preparation. He checked the chamber by touch alone. Then he said something that made the driver's hands tighten on the wheel. When we stop, Bumpy said calmly, don't wait for instructions. The driver swallowed. You expecting trouble? Bumpy's eyes stayed forward. No, he said, I'm expecting intent. The road narrowed, engines closed distance. And somewhere behind them, someone had decided this night was finally going to collect its debt. The only question left. Who was going to pay first? The dead street swallowed sound, warehouses on both sides, long shadows, no witnesses who mattered. The cars behind them closed in, smooth and patient like men already filling out paperwork in their heads. Now, Bumpy said, the driver cut the engine and rolled. Momentum carried them just enough. Bumpy was out before the car fully stopped, coat flaring, feet steady on broken pavement. The first door behind him opened too fast. That told him who was nervous. Bumpy didn't fire, he stepped aside. The shot meant for his chest shattered glass instead. Noise bounced wild between brick walls. Confusion followed it, short, sharp, expensive. That's when the night turned. Lights snapped on from places no one had noticed. Engines roared from angles that didn't make sense a second ago. Doors slammed. Men shouted names they hadn't planned on saying out loud. The trap folded inward. Bumpy moved through it like he'd already walked it in his head 100 times. He spoke once, voice cutting clean through panic. Enough. The word landed heavy. A man stepped forward from the second car, hands up, eyes wide with the realization that contracts don't mean protection when you misunderstand the terrain. "This isn't what we agreed to," the man said. Bumpy looked at him, calm as a Sunday morning. "You agreed with someone who never met me," Bumpy replied. "That's on you." Sirens wailed in the distance, real ones not staged. That wasn't coincidence either. This night had layers, the man swallowed. "We can still fix this." Bumpy shook his head once. "No," he said, "you already spent that chance." He stepped closer, close enough to be heard only by the people who needed to hear it. "You wanted efficiency," Bumpy said softly. "So here it is. You walk away alive and you take a message with you." The man nodded too fast. "You tell them," Bumpy continued, "that I don't disappear, I decide who does." Bumpy turned away before gratitude could form. That's how you keep it clean. As engines scattered and shadows fled, he stood alone again, the street returning to what it was before ambition tried to own it. But he knew this wasn't the end, because men like that don't forgive humiliation. They escalate. And somewhere, someone higher up was already rewriting the plan. With fewer witnesses and a colder ending in mind. Part 18. The city didn't celebrate. It never does when something real happens. By morning, the street was clean again. No shells, no bodies, no stories anyone could prove. Just a few men waking up with the uneasy feeling that something important had gone wrong the night before. Downtown, phones rang early. Voices stayed low. Plans were adjusted without admitting why. The word Johnson stopped appearing in sentences where it didn't belong. Not respect, not fear, acceptance. Bumpy returned to Harlem before sunrise. Same walk, same calm. The neighborhood breathed easier without knowing why. That was always his role, absorbing danger so other people could pretend life was normal. He sat alone once more, coffee untouched, hat resting beside him. He D1, but winning had never been the goal. He reached into his coat and pulled out the photograph again, looked at it longer this time. Let himself feel the weight of what he'd protected and what it had cost. The city was safe for now. His name still carried weight. The hunters had backed off, but the distance remained, an ocean wide, permanent. He folded the photo and put it away, careful, like it might break if handled wrong. "You did good," someone said quietly nearby. Bumpy didn't look up. Good doesn't mean whole. Outside, Harlem woke up. Kids ran to school. Storefronts opened. Life continued because men like him stayed in the shadows and paid the price quietly. Bumpy stood, slipping his hat back on, shoulders settling into that familiar stillness. The stillness of a man who'd seen the endgame and chosen solitude over weakness. He stepped into the street, back into the noise, back into the role, back into a world that would never know how close it came to losing him or how much he gave up to stay. Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson walked on, power intact, secret buried, heart carrying a sentence no court could reduce. Because in his world, the final cost of survival was never death. It was living with what you saved, and who you had to leave behind to do it.